Hey guys, welcome to 7.6 day 2. Today we're actually focusing on the half angle formulas. Okay, so number 1, find the exact value of cosine of 112.5. Well, clearly that's not on the unit circle, but it's half of an angle that is on the unit circle. So 112.5 is really half of 225 degrees. So we can use the cosine half angle, plugging in 225 for A, and then we'll be able to find its value. Okay, so it's going to be plus or minus big square root sign 1 plus cos of 225 divided by 2. And these just get a little algebra nasty, but we'll be okay. So just step by step here, plus or minus square root, cosine of 225 is negative root 2 over 2, and then this is all over 2. And then, like I said, a little nasty with the algebra. Now it's plus or minus the square root. If you get a common denominator here, it's going to be 2 minus root 2 all over 2, but then still all over this 2. Okay, so we got a common denominator and then still all over 2. Okay, so now we're at plus or minus square root. Dividing by 2 is like multiplying by 1/2. So now we're at square root of 2 minus root 2 all over 4. But then, now we're at plus or minus. The square root of 4, we can just pull out as a 2. So now we're at the square root of 2 minus root 2, and then out of the square root sign is just a 2. Okay, so now we need to talk about the plus or the minus. 112.5 is in quadrant 2. Is cosine positive or negative in quadrant 2? And you would say negative. So we want the negative version of this ratio. So that is your final answer. Okay, not the prettiest problem, but that's how these go. Okay, number 2. Same thing. Pi over 8 is not on the unit circle, but pi over 8 is just half of pi over 4. And pi over 4 is on the unit circle. So we can use the sine half angle with pi over 4. All right, so plus or minus square root. For sine, it's 1 minus cosine of pi over 4 all over 2. All right, so that becomes plus or minus the square root of 1 minus, well, cosine of pi over 4 is root 2 over 2, and then that's all over 2. And then actually, we're going to notice by algebra, we're actually going to get the same answer as this one, right? But I'll work it out if you need it. So if we get a common denominator here, it's going to again be 2 minus root 2 all over 2, all over 2. But then dividing by 2 is like multiplying by 1/2. So really then 2 times 2 becomes a 4. Okay, so I'm skipping over a little bit of the algebra here. So this one's going to be plus or minus the square root of 2 minus root 2 again, all over, well, the square root of 4 is just a 2. And now let's talk, do we want the plus or the minus? Pi over 8 is in the first quadrant, so we want the positive, because sine is positive in the first. So this is your answer. Okay, and then this one we can hold off of. We'll do this one in class, but it's really the same idea. But we can save that one if you guys want that to be our warm-up. Okay, the backside, let's see what we got here. Okay. So yes, the backside is not the unit circle. We might just have to draw a triangle and kind of see what's going on. So let's draw a triangle in quadrant 3. Okay, so this is alpha here. So if cosine is -3/5, we know adjacent is -3, hypotenuse is 5, and opposite is -4. That's just Pythagorean theorem. Okay, so sine of alpha over 2, so the half angle, let me pull out the formula here. And let's write it down. So the formula is going to be plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine alpha all over 2. Okay, I just stole that formula. Okay, well, we know cosine, right? Cosine is just -3/5, so we're just going to plug that in to cosine alpha. So now it's plus or minus the square root of 1 minus a -3/5. I'm just going to make that +3/5, and then all over 2. And then again, just kind of the messy algebra. If you get a common denominator, it's going to be the square root of, this will be 5/5. So 5 plus 3 is 8/5 divided by 2. But 8/5 divided by 2 is actually just 8/10. Again, this should be fine for you guys. So now this is really plus or minus the square root of 8/10. If we want to reduce that, we could call it 4/5. Okay, so plus or minus the square root of 4/5. But then we need to rationalize it. So if we multiply by √5 over √5, we end up with √20 over 5. And then square root of 20 simplifies to 2√5 over 5. And now let's talk plus or minus. The half angle of something in the third quadrant would be in the second quadrant, and sine is positive in quadrant 2, so we want the positive version. So that's your answer. Sorry if me skipping through that algebra was too fast, but don't worry, we have another one here. Okay, cosine of alpha over 2. Let's pull out our half angle for cosine, and that's plus or minus the square root of 1 plus cosine divided by 2. Okay, and then same thing, we know cosine, that's a over h -3/5. So it's plus or minus the square root of 1 minus 3/5 all divided by 2. All right, and that's plus or minus the square root of, if you get a common denominator, 5/5 minus 3/5 is 2/5, but then we still have divided by 2. But what's 2/5 divided by 2? That's 2/10. So this is really plus or minus the square root of 2/10. But if you reduce that, that's really the square root of 1/5. And then if you rationalize it by √5 over √5, we end up with the square root of 5 over 5. Now let's talk plus or minus. If the angle's in quadrant 3, then the half angle's in quadrant 2, but cosine is negative there. So we want the negative version. All right, let's do tan. So tan's double angle formula is, oh, you have 3 choices. Which one do you guys want? Doesn't matter at all. I'm going to use this one. Why not? Doesn't matter. So it's 1 minus cosine alpha over sine alpha. And if you guys want to try a different one and see if we get the same answer, go for it. Okay, so we got 1 minus cosine of alpha is negative 3/5, but minus the negative is going to be positive 3/5. And then all over sine of alpha is negative 4/5. All right, so we need a common denominator on top. 5/5 plus 3/5 is 8/5. And 8/5 divided by negative 4/5, you guys know we're going to multiply by the reciprocal, negative 5/4. And then if we just reduce, the 5's cancel, 8 over 4 is 2, 2 times negative 1, this is just going to be negative 2. Again, a shortcut, tan's half angle is just sine divided by cosine, if they're half angles, and you would also get negative 2. All right, last one, guys. We're verifying an identity. So we want to show that this side is actually equal to this side. So I'm going to start with the left side. Get a new color here. Isn't secant really just 1 over cosine? So I'm going to call this 1 over cosine squared of theta over 2. And then another way to write it is cosine of theta over 2 squared. All right, so if we can find cosine's half angle identity, that is right here. So 1 over, I'm just going to plug cosine's half angle identity in. Plus or minus square root of 1 plus cosine theta all over 2, but then we're squaring that, right? It says squared, so we're squaring that. Okay, well, you guys know what happens when you square a square root and a plus and a minus, just everything cancels, and we're left with 1 plus cosine theta all over 2. And then, oh, sorry, don't forget it's 1 over that. All right, so 1 over all that. Well, dividing by a fraction is like multiplying by the reciprocal. So if you just flip this, I think we're done. 2 over 1 plus cosine theta. And that's what we wanted. All right, awesome, guys. Thank you for watching. That's the last video of the chapter.